you ever thought to yourself, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life? If you have, you are in the right place. This is one episode of 8 parts in Season 3 of Ride the Tide Collective, the podcast, that will help you figure out what you are doing in your life and career. Regardless of your career status at this point, this short season will give you direction and thoughts to ponder that will help you find clarity moving forward. I am excited to help you take control of your career. Welcome everyone. In part 2 of I Don't Know What I'm Doing with My Life, we are digging into truth and reality. Truth and reality, huh? What does that even mean? Well, let me share a story. I had a position way back when and a manager that I believed didn't like me. Even though they hired me directly, after working there for a few months, I felt like they just didn't care for me. I will say, I am a direct communicator, I'm a visionary, and I'm a fixer, which were all traits that this particular office needed, but they were also traits that were not valued by my manager or certain members of the team. In fact, they were perceived as a power grab. I was in the classic, it's been working up to this point, why do we have to change it scenario. The behavior and communication I received made me question every move I made. I was extremely anxious at work, more than normal, and I was consistently second-guessing every interaction I had and email I wrote. Internally, I was imploding because I thought I was doing everything they wanted, but nothing was changing. After about 6 months of this treatment, I started to look inward. Was it me? Am I truly doing something wrong? I started documenting my interactions with my manager, and I soon realized that while yes, there were behaviors I held that could be modified for the environment and culture of the team, overall, the issues my manager had were their issues. I wasn't rude. I didn't go over their head. I communicated clearly. I consistently provided documentation of my work and results, and started to ask more questions than provide suggestions of how to make our team and office better. At the end of the day, their behavior never really changed. There was still apprehension, fear, and judgment coming from them. It was in a moment that I realized it wasn't me. I did the work. I made the effort to adapt and still was met with resistance. This was on my manager. From there, my anxiety lifted. I still remember the feeling I had the day I walked in not caring about my manager's attitude toward me. Talk about relief and freedom. This is a story I like to share because it was a turning point for me in my career. It was when I realized that sometimes you can show up and be your best, and the other person is still human and dealing with their own trials. But in order to know that, we need to look at the truth and reality of our situation. In my story, I looked at myself and made the changes I thought would help based on the feedback I received, but it wasn't enough. Another way to look at this example is with how you internalize your interactions with people at work or in your life. Do you create a crazy narrative in your head about how the other person thinks or feels about you based on a few interactions? Have you considered the other person's life or barriers? For example, you are convinced a coworker hates you. You've had a few weird interactions with them, and internally, you think they hate you. What is the truth? They have never said they didn't like you, and no one has told you about any communication they had with the person that makes it seem like they hate you. The reality? The person, or their behavior, reminds you of someone from your past who didn't like you, and you are unintentionally connecting those experiences together. When you realize what you are doing, you spend time digging into the hurt that person caused and how it's still impacting you today. You now have more clarity around your interaction with this coworker, and you were able to identify an old wound you didn't realize you still carried and let it go. Truth and reality. I want you to think about this when it comes to your relationships. You can do it for other aspects of your life, but relationships is the easiest one to grasp this idea and start changing how your mind interprets interactions. It's about listening to the internal talk, honoring it, and making sure it's speaking truth. Think about your significant other, Your parents, your in-laws, your kids, your coworkers, your friends? Are there people you have a less than stellar relationship with? Why? What is the truth? Don't get me wrong, some people are awful, and we need to be able to see the truth in that as well. And sometimes we are the problem, and we need to own it. This exercise will help you identify your blind spots when it comes to others and confront issues in a way that is true and not speculative. If you aren't sure, document your interactions with the people and reflect on what was truth and what was created in your head. Don't get me wrong, this is a tough activity, and even to this day, there are people in my life that I have to actively stop and tell myself that I am making up a story. I'll share one last example from my personal life that I think articulates this all perfectly. When my husband and I got married, we were in the process of learning about each other in relation to our home and chores around the house. I remember one night I was doing dishes and I said to him, "Hey, I had to rewash this pan. There was still oil on it. I wanted to let you know." He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Why are you always criticizing me?" What? I said very calmly, "Thank you, counseling training. I am not criticizing you. Why do you think that?" And he responded, "You are criticizing how I did the dishes. It wasn't good enough for you." Okay. First, I never said it wasn't good enough. I simply stated that there was still oil, and I wanted you to know if you're the one to clean this pan next time. We ended up discussing the interaction in more depth, and I learned that because my delivery was straightforward and direct, he heard it as criticism. I shared with him that while I'm happy to work on my delivery, he also needed to work on how he was internalizing my tone and get into why he perceived it as criticism. This is something we continue to work on in our marriage, and we have been together for over 10 years. I like this story because it shows how a simple statement can be taken a completely different way by another person when there are some deeper triggers that have to be worked out. Beyond this exercise, we go into reframing, which is something I do with clients often. This is taking what you learned about a person or experience and learning to talk about it in a new way, and usually a more positive way. In the story of my previous manager, I had to reframe not only my thoughts about their leadership abilities, but my experience during that time. When I look back on that time, I remember the good and positive things that came from it, and I choose to remember what my manager taught me. I find this exercise to be one of the hardest because it requires a lot of introspection and forgiveness, but the growth you experience is well worth it. As we are trying to figure out what to do with our lives, the idea of truth, reality, and reframing helps us become clear about our past or current circumstances and allows us to move forward confidently with a clear mind. If you have any questions, please connect with Ride the Tide Collective on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Facebook, and I'll add your question to our Q&A episode at the end of the season. For those who know you are ready to work, I recommend downloading the guidebook complement to this season called I Don't Know What I'm Doing with My Life, A Guide to Career Clarity. I will link it in the show notes.